Hi, welcome. I tried to do this in the recording studio and it just wouldn't let me, so I'll have to look into that. But this is going to be a bit of an introductionary video or article post to a series that I'm planning in the future. I'm just going to name it the Futhark. So this is the introduction to that. And I had people contact me over that, so I'm happy to do this. And I was planning it anyway, but time is just not always my friend right now. But I mean, I do want to give you what you want. Um, so the Futhark. The Futhark, the word itself is just the first six runes. Futhark. Fehu, Urus, Durizas, Ansus, Raido, Genas. That's it. It basically means the alphabet. It is divided, and Freya Aswig is the person that divided these into three families or etir. Families, etir, family, et, singular, plural. There, I'm not sure why, but it makes complete sense because there is a system to this, meaning that there are groups of eight, eight being one number less than nine, nine being Odin's number. You, the reader, the user, are this is my interpretation, just mine, that you are the ninth room because you are the interpreter. You are the one that stands between the runar, which is the laws of nature, if you will, or of existence on Midgard, just Midgard, and the individual experience. You are the one that interprets, the one that experiences, the one that observes. And the way that these at work, in my interpretation, is a bit like Maslow's pyramid of human needs. So you have your basic needs at the bottom, and then you gradually go on to less needs that aren't necessary for survival. But the more that your basic needs are filled, the more that these needs become important in your life. Meaning that if you have a place to sleep, you are fed, you are healthy, you are going to start looking for more than that. If you're always hungry, you're going to focus on being hungry. If you're always sleepy, you're going to focus on being sleepy. That is just human biology. That is generally true for everybody. That is even true for animals. If you're going to be hungry, it's a basic need that you're going to need for survival. You're never going to um, think about things like philosophy, art. You just won't. That's also why I think that the struggling, hungry artist is kind of a bullshit idea, but it's neither near nor there. So the first et is basically the bottom of the pyramid. You are going to look for what it is that makes you a content person. And what makes a person content? Having enough means to sustain themselves, which also includes a tribe and family, heat, and a rudimentary civilization, which is more heart based than it is mind based. Meaning that we want to feel safe and appreciated and loved by the people that surround us. We don't want to be in a fight with those people. Now, the second ed, individuation. How do you separate yourself from the group mind? Which we all do. We want to be individuals. We want to belong to a tribe, to a group, to a family. But we also want to be our own person. We don't want to exist as just a cog in a machine. That makes us very unhappy. So the individuation process starts. And that usually goes hand in hand with things like the dark night of the soul, with struggle in the mind, in the heart, spiritually. and that often also translates to struggle with the outside world. But the reason that there are that runes like Sowilo and Kenas are in that ed is because this pays off. And we need to, and if we stick to our paths, to our Haminya, this pays off really brilliantly, because it's not just you that benefits from it, but also the world around you that benefits from this. And from that, we see societies, higher societies, um, take shape, which is what the third ed is about. Society at large. It has things such as the legal system, um, the, the 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 philosophical aspects of male and female and their place within such societies. There is room for spirituality, for contracts. Spirituality in the sense how it can benefit a group, not just an individual. So, cooperation between individuals in order to achieve something that transcends themselves or the combination of those individuals. They are color coded. I always thought or felt that the first ed was green, the second one was red, and the third one was blue. Blue because it's rather cold, which is something that we tend to associate when we think of legality. Well, police officers are often in blue uniforms because it has to do just with the stabilization of society and the individuals therein. So it's rather cool. It's not emotion driven. Now, the second ed, red, is very emotion driven, very struggle heavy. So red, with obviously the association of blood attached to it. The first ed, green, although Freya said that it was yellow. And I have thought about this, and I think she's right, is that yellow is a better color for several reasons. First and for all, if we make it yellow, we have the three primary colors. The three primary colors make all the colors. Every color that is not blue, red, or green can be broken down into a combination of these three colors. So that there is real logic behind that. It also makes sense for runes. Runes being the visual aspects of natural law. So a natural law cannot be perverted, or at least not for long before there is a huge swing back. So yeah, okay, yellow. I concede that yellow is better, although I'm not going to change mine because just for the practical reason, if I make them yellow, it's going to be very hard to see on a screen. And that's the only reason why I keep them green now. They are a alphabet. That's true. And we can see that on the rune stones that you can see in Scandinavia quite often. But they are also a magic system, a complete magic system, meaning that they work on their own. They don't need to be supplemented by other magic practices. They can work standalone. And I think that goes very underestimated in the esoteric community at large. Also because runes are often a bit derided as being like, oh, that's basically just a toy, and Hasbro is the one that invented that divination. That's not true, and we know that's not true. That is, I mean, it's possible that they brought that out as a game at some point, in the same way that they brought out the Ouija board, the spirit board. Now, was it ever intended to be a child's game? No, but maybe they brought it out as such, which I find controversial, to say it mildly. They were absolutely used in magic. And we can see that on weapons sometimes. People would write their name on a weapon But it's not just signaling ownership. It means something more than that. It is a declaration, because the sword, being an extension of your own will, of your own might, your authority and your might, you put your name behind that. You want to put your name behind that, right? For obvious reasons. Because if you cut down an enemy, you don't just want that enemy to be cut down. You want that enemy to know it was you that cut him down. Or at least our ancestors would have taken great pride in that. So yeah, their names were on the sword, but there were also incantations on the sword. One that very, very much stood out to me is that there was a weapon, and it had a series of Tiwas runes, several of them on the sword, on the weapon. Now, being it the rune of justice, divine justice, retribution, sometimes even revenge, because revenge can be justified. I mean, we can infer with great confidence that that was a magic spell that was on that sword, meaning that this sword is crying out for justice. This sword wants justice. Now, what kind of justice? I kind of forgot what the runes were behind that, but maybe it was spelling a name, maybe it was just a series of runes that meant something to that specific person in how and why that justice had to occur. Justice by sword, very serious ordeal. So yes, they were definitely, absolutely used for magic. This is also in the sagas. I wrote an article about that. I will try to link it in the comments. But what I am trying to do with this series is I want to touch on several things. I want to touch on their divination aspects. Now, Galdr and Stadha, I'm already almost finished with that series, but it's rather specific. Now, of course, Galdr is inextricably linked to runic magic. And that would be considered high magic, sorcery, almost. No, not almost, it is. But it does have a very ritualistic element to it. Now, we don't know what Galdr were in the time of our ancestors. We know that they were sung, that they were chanted, because that's kind of what the word means also. It was Freya Aswin that said that you can Galdr runes individually or in series, depending on what you want to accomplish. Then it was Edred Thorson or Stephen Flowers that did research on that, and he has written a book about it called Rune Song, if I'm not mistaken. And he came up with a more ritualistic approach to Galdr, which he also explains in his book why he thinks it was uttered in this way. He says it has to do with the sound, the frequency of the vowels that are in the Galdr, which is probably true. There is something to that, very much so. In that same book, he also explains that this is not set in stone. You must do what works. And I've been for a while now working on something to revise those Galdrs a little bit, to make them more ceremonial, because runic magic was way more off the cuff than ceremonial magic. But there are ceremonies in Germanic spirituality. The Bloods took on a ceremonial nature. Then there were also the funerals. They took on a ceremonial nature. And the reason for that is because they were communal. Usually the whole tribe came together to perform this. And if everybody knew what was expected or which order was going to follow, that creates a charge because everybody is focused on the same thing. So there is an actual logic behind that. Now, but magic, now sorcery, actual magic, well, actual magic. When we're talking about we are going to do a blessing or a curse, that was way more off the cuff. The ceremonial aspect was really not so much a thing in magic application of runes. That is more of a southern thing, and that slowly came into the West and North European world through things like Hermeticism. No, I'm not trying to slag it off. I'm not. It definitely has its uses, and for some people it works way better than off the cuff magic. Now, it also kind of depends what you want to accomplish, but I'll get into that in the later series as well. But with examples. So that is what I'm planning to do. Also highlighting perhaps that a rune in a divination or a reading can take on a whole different nature depending on where it's falling in the reading. And then also that its meaning can differ vastly from its magical working. Hagelas would be a great example for that, by the way. Hagelas in a reading is rarely good, rarely, because of obviously it denotes destruction, total destruction. Some people compare it to the Tower card in the tarot, though I find that a false equivalent because the Tower signifies destruction to its foundation, while Hagelas denotes destruction that is total and inevitable, with sometimes great consequences to yourself that are not always good for you. Doesn't have to be, but if it points to destruction, it is the kind of destruction that is going to be quite brutal. Not that the Tower cannot be brutal, it definitely can be, but with the Tower, not everything is destroyed. With Hagelas, destroys everything in its path. But like the Wild Hunt. So, the same rune can be used sometimes for different things. All runes can be used for curses. Every single one of them. I think it's that's this a new age mistake, a woo-woo new age mistake, saying that no, you should never use runes for curses because that's all bullshit. They can all be used for curses, and they have been used for curses throughout the ages. Now, should you? I mean, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but there are rules to the game. We'll get into it. I'm planning a few articles on black magic and curses, by the way. Apart from this, although there will be some overlap here and there. But yeah, that was my idea. That's what I want to do with this series. Like, I'm going to talk about individual runes, how they can be interpreted in readings, and also what their associations may be if you're going to use them in a magical working. Because you stack meaning and that builds a charge. For instance, if you have the Feho rune, you wanna gain something, you need to find correspondences to work with. Now, some people are not going to need that, but then there are people that are going to heavily benefit from that. I benefit from that. If I stack correspondences, that benefits me in my workings because that's just how my mind works. And you need to know your own mind very, very well because you need to know how your mind works. Not necessarily what you're thinking all the time or the deepest, darkest thoughts you're having, although they can definitely help you a lot. You need to know how it works. How do you learn? What causes your mind to reject something? What causes your mind to be fascinated by something? That's important. It's way more important than knowing all your deepest, darkest thoughts. Because if you know how your mind works, it will automatically lead you to those darker thoughts. Because they're part of you, right? They can be. Very often, we want to we kind of want to pretend that it's not us thinking dark thoughts, but we are, and that is a part of us. We need to acknowledge that. We cannot go pretending that it's always somebody else or something else like an entity. Now, that also happens, obviously, but we do it too. We are not innocent creatures. And it bodes well for an occultist or a magician to be aware of that. So, general introduction. I'll get more into it later. Please, though, let me know. Do you prefer me putting things in video format, or would you prefer articles? Like, I'm good with either. It's like I just had very little idea how to structure this article without it being full of pictures, and then it becomes incredibly long, and then I don't proofread it anymore, and then it's full of typos, and that's why, because I had some trouble figuring out how I was going to approach the intro. But yeah, let me know. I mean, I asked this before, whether you would prefer the monthly rune readings in writing or in video format, and it was 50-50. So I thought I just kept on doing them in writing then. But anyway, I mean, let you know your thoughts, because it's more than one person that has contacted me over writing specifically on runes, and I really had to think on how I was going to approach it. And I think this is the way I'm going to do it, by going over the runes one by one for divination, magic, ceremony, correspondence stacking, meditations, and so on. Also, one thing for the people that might subscribe to me and also go to Freya's classes, these are my own thoughts. I do not, what Freya says in her classes, I never include in these ones. Just so you know, that you won't be hearing the exact same things. When I get something from Freya, I will say that it's from her, but everything else, unspecified of who it comes from, this comes from me personally. So it's not going to be the same thing. Anyway, thank you very much for watching and listening, and I will see you, well, soon, because I'm quite often on Substack anyway. Thank you very much for your support. May you walk with the gods.